The last witness on the panel is Elisa Massimino. She's the president and CEO of Human Rights First, an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law Center. Human Rights First is one of the nation's leading human rights advocacy groups, and Ms. Massimino and Human Rights First have been great partners with this subcommittee working on our human rights agenda. Before joining Human Rights First, Massimino was a litigator in private practice and taught philosophy, earned her J.D. from the University of Michigan, Master of Arts in Philosophy from Johns Hopkins, and Phi Beta Kappa from Trinity University in San Antonio. Ms. Massimino, you've testified before the subcommittee before, and I welcome you back. Please proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the importance of closing Guantanamo and how we can do so in a way that protects our country, our national security, and our values. As the president of an organization whose central mission is to advance American global leadership on human rights, I focus on ensuring that our country remains a beacon to freedom-seeking people around the world and that it can continue to lead by the power of example. That is why, after the terrorist attacks on our country, we joined forces with more than 50 retired generals and admirals, led by former Marine Corps Commandant Chuck Krulak and former CENTCOM Commander Joe Hoare, who believe that our values and institutions are assets in the fight against terrorism, not liabilities. I have been to Guantanamo and met the dedicated people serving there under difficult circumstances. We have been official observers to every military commission convened at Guantanamo since its inception. We know and have great respect for the service members and civilian defense lawyers who are struggling to navigate this untested and jerry-rigged system to wring some form of justice from it. Some would have you believe that Guantanamo's critics are a handful of human rights activists, some foreigners, and defense lawyers for detainees. That's not true. The loudest and most persistent calls to close the prison come from our own senior defense, law enforcement, intelligence, and diplomatic officials, people with a 360 view of the costs and benefits of Guantanamo who have concluded that our national security is best served by closing it. President Bush said he wanted to close Guantanamo. Henry Kissinger called Guantanamo a blot on our national reputation. Jim Baker said it has given America a very, very bad name. Admiral Dennis Blair, former Director of National Intelligence, called Guantanamo, quote, a rallying cry for terrorist recruitment and harmful to our national security. Secretary Gates told President Bush that Guantanamo was a national security liability and advised him to close it down. Major General Michael Leonard, as you said, who was in charge of standing up Guantanamo in 2002, said it cost us the moral high ground. Former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, said that Guantanamo has been, quote, a recruiting symbol for our enemies. General Colin Powell said he would close it not tomorrow, this afternoon. And Senator McCain has suggested that it would be an act of moral courage to find a way to shutter the prison. Whatever one thinks about the initial benefits of detaining prisoners at Guantanamo, there is a growing bipartisan consensus that we no longer need it. Today's hearing cataloged the reasons why it is imperative to transform this consensus into action. We heard about the astronomical cost of Guantanamo at a time when the Pentagon is furloughing more than 500,000 employees. General Eaton reminded us that the impending end of combat operations in Afghanistan will require a change in detention authorities. General Xenakis described the deterioration of morale at Guantanamo and the degraded mental state of many of the prisoners, a combination that is leading to a tipping point. And Lieutenant Friday told us how Guantanamo has warped our system of justice. In many ways, the struggle with al-Qaeda is a war of ideals. That is the battleground on which our country should have the greatest advantage. Sometimes when we lose our way, outsiders who admire our values can remind us of who we are and what we stand for. Some family members of Guantanamo detainees have written letters to you in advance of this hearing, and I want to quote from them. Ahmed Hajarab, the uncle of an Algerian who has been detained for more than a decade without charge and has been cleared for release, wrote, when in 2002 I was told that Nabil was detained by the Americans, I thought that at least he would have a right to a fair trial. I thought his rights would be respected and that justice would prevail. What I feel today is mostly incomprehension. How can this nation, one that prides itself on defending human rights, close its eyes to these violations of its founding principles? Hisham Sliti from Tunisia has been held for more than a decade without charge. He, too, has been cleared for transfer. His mother wrote, I do not understand why my son is still in Guantanamo after all these years when we know he has been cleared. We never thought the United States was the kind of place where people could be held like this. We've often talked about who we are as a nation, but sooner or later, who we are cannot be separated from what we do. As we wind down the war in Afghanistan, we must expunge the legacy of Guantanamo and restore America's reputation for justice and the rule of law. The question is not why or if, but how. Today, Human Rights First has published a comprehensive exit strategy with a detailed plan for closing the prison. Among the challenges facing our country today, closing Guantanamo is far from the most complex. While it may be politically complicated, as Senator McCain recently said, it's not rocket science. It is a risk management exercise, and the risk is manageable. With leadership from the President and Congress, we can get this done. Thank you again for convening this hearing and soliciting our views. We're deeply grateful for your leadership, Mr. Chairman, on this and so many other human rights issues. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Ms. Massimino. I believe the President should move according to his promise to close Guantanamo, but I also believe that Congress has made that exceedingly difficult with restrictions that we put in place in terms of the transfer of these detainees. Would you comment on those restrictions?
Yes, I would be happy to do that. I also would like to say one word about the federal prisons because I had some of the same questions, and I understand that many people have these anxieties. So I reached out to the American Correctional Association and asked them what they thought about whether they could handle these kinds of prisoners. And they asked me, do you know who's in there now? These are not nice people. We know how to handle this. We've got this. As Senator Graham said, it's absurd to think that our corrections officials cannot handle this population. You're absolutely right, Senator, that Congress has made closing Guantanamo more difficult because of these transfer restrictions. And I was happy to see that the Senate Defense Authorization Bill has included some provisions that would give greater authority to the Commander-in-Chief to dispose of the prisoners at Guantanamo in the way that he thinks best fits our national security. And I hope those provisions become law. We also, in our exit strategy document that we released today, break down the population at Guantanamo. It's essentially about the math. We have 166 people. The majority of those have been cleared for transfer. The President has now appointed a leader at the State Department to take on this challenge, and we're awaiting the appointment of a leader at the Defense Department to do the same. There is renewed urgency about this, as you heard from Senator Feinstein about what's going on down there with the hunger strikes. So this is something on which the President and Congress have to work together. Presidential leadership is essential, but Congress needs to trust the Commander-in-Chief to make these decisions.
There are, as of November 2012, 166 detainees in Guantanamo. Is there any reason to believe that if those individuals were released, their recidivism rate would be any less than the Guantanamo detainees who've already been released, who have re-engaged in terrorism at a rate of 28%, according to the head of the DNI?
The claim that 28% of Guantanamo detainees have, quote-unquote, rejoined the fight is highly misleading. And Defense Department officials have said that many detainees included in that category are merely suspected of having some associations with terrorist groups and may very well have not engaged in any activities that threaten our national security. But that doesn't mean that all the prisoners at Gitmo are somehow innocent farmers and that there's no risk. I really think this question about recidivism has to relate to what is our overall objective. You know, a lot of the people at Guantanamo are precisely the kinds of targets that al-Qaeda looks to for cannon fodder. And some of them could cause harm if they are released. But that doesn't make them any different from the hundreds of thousands of other angry young men throughout the Muslim world who believe in the same cause. And there are, sadly, no shortage of potential suicide bombers. Guantanamo does nothing to solve that problem. In fact, it probably makes it worse.